Lucky beans. Cold wind ripped through Marshall Loman's old wool jacket. The snow froze his toes right up through his hand-me-down boots. He ran up the steps into the steamy kitchen. "What's for dinner, Ma? I'm starving." "Get those boots off and hang your coat up," Ma said, without looking around, "and I don't want to hear any complaints about dinner." But Marshall had already peeked into the big pot. "Beans? Again? Oh, Ma, can't we ever have anything else?" "Yeah, it's beans again, and we're lucky to have them. So get washed on the double and then set the table." Marshall didn't feel so lucky. The elbows of his jacket were worn almost all the way through. Dad had been out of work for months, and there was no money. The house was crowded since Aunt Minnie and Uncle Matt moved in. Now Marshall had to share a room with his little brother and sister, Tommy and Patsy, and he was starting to hate beans. After dinner, when Ma pulled out her mending basket, Marshall showed her his worn-out jacket. Dad turned on the radio. "President Roosevelt's going to speak tonight," he said. "Maybe he's found a way to get America out of the mess we're in." Well, Marshall was halfway through his homework when the president came on the radio. He didn't understand all the big words, but he knew Mr. Roosevelt was on the poor people's side. On the way to school the next morning, Marshall and Tommy trudged past Kaplan's furniture store, and whenever Marshall helped Ma carry groceries home, she would stop and look at the shining sewing machine in the window. Only $23.95, the sign had said. That was $23.95 that Ma would never have. Today, alongside the sewing machine, was the biggest jar of beans he had ever seen. And there was a different sign. "How many beans are in the jar? Win this brand new sewing machine." "How many beans they got in there, Marshall?" Tommy pulled on Marshall's sleeve. 100? 1,000? "Well, how should I know?" Marshall answered. But he was thinking, I know somebody who would know. On the way home, Marshall looked through the store window again. Ladies were writing on little cards of paper and pushing them into a slot in a big box. Well, that night, after Ma checked his homework, Marshall told her about the contest. The next day, when Marshall and Tommy got home, Ma said, "I went to the furniture store today." She was cooking beans again. "Did you enter the contest?" "Not so fast. I need a little more time to chew it over. Aren't you going to complain about having beans?" Ma joked. Marshall shook his head. "I figure the more you know about beans, the better." That night's homework was a page of arithmetic problems. How many cups are in a pint? Well, Marshall knew the answer. 2. How many pints are in a quart? Ma was looking over his shoulder. "Boy, don't you know how many pints fit in a quart?" she said. "Go down to the cellar and fetch me an empty pint jar." In the cellar, Ma kept food that she had canned from Dad's garden. There were more empty jars than full ones. Last winter, when Ma sent them to fetch something, he and Tommy would snitch a pickle from the great big crock pot at the foot of the stairs. Now the pickle crock pot was empty too. Ma showed him how to fill up the small pint jar with water and pour it into an empty quart milk bottle to measure it. 2 pints filled the quart, so 4 cups make a quart. After school the next day, Marshall saw the new sign in Mr. Kaplan's window. "Only 2 days left to make your guess." Kids were standing around. "Our Ma's going to win that sewing machine," Tommy piped up. "Your Ma?" Agnes, a girl in Marshall's class, whirled around to face Tommy. "They won't let your mama win. Only white ladies can win contests." Tommy shouted back, "That's not true!" And then he turned to Marshall. "Is it?" Marshall grabbed his little brother's hand and marched into the store. "Come on, Tommy, we're going to find out." "Well, young man, what can I do for you?" Mr. Kaplan said to Marshall. "Well, I have a question about the sewing machine contest rules. Can anybody win, or can only white ladies win?" Mr. Kaplan took his glasses off, and he looked Marshall in the eye. Anybody can win this contest, he said. This is America. It will be fair. When Marshall and Tommy got home, Ma was cooking potatoes and cabbage, but 5 sacks of beans sat on the kitchen table. Where'd all those beans come from? Marshall asked. Oh, the church ladies and neighbors. After dinner, I want you boys to help me count them. But run down to the cellar now, Marshall, and fetch me a pint jar of tomatoes. Out of habit, Marshall checked the pickle crock before starting back upstairs, and of course it was still empty, but Marshall stopped in his tracks. The pickle crock, he was sure of it, was the same size as that big jar of beans. They could count how many beans fit into the pickle crock. Then Ma would know the right number. After dinner, Dad lugged the pickle crock up to the kitchen. They all crowded around, counting beans from the sacks and then dumping them into the crock. The last bean was number 4,341, but the 4,341 beans didn't fill much of the crock. Ma peered in. Well, she said, the sign did say, guess. I reckon that's what we'll have to do. Then Marshall remembered something from school. His class was finished with measuring, and now they were learning estimating. It's better than guessing, Miss Dover had said. Use what you already know to solve the problem. Marshall said, Ma, I know. Let's count how many beans fit in a quart jar and how many quarts of water fill up the crock. Then we can multiply beans times quarts to get the estimate number of beans. Ma grinned at him. Now you're cooking with gas, she said. When they were finished counting and multiplying, they had the number Ma thought was right. 53,280 beans. On Sunday morning, Mr. Kaplan's furniture store was full of people. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kaplan announced, we have 327 entries, and today we have a winner. First, let's reveal how many beans are in the jar. Well, he unscrewed the lid, and he showed the number marked inside. 53,293. Marshall heard gasps and a whistle. Holy mackerel, somebody said. Marshall's heart was thumping hard. Ma's guess was so close. Was she going to win? Mr. Kaplan went on. One guess was off by only 13 beans, and the winner, who guessed 53,280 beans, is Mrs. Josephine Lohman from 7234 Monticello Street. Ma, that's you! Marshall threw his arms around his mother's waist. Congratulations, Mrs. Lohman. Mr. Kaplan shook Ma's hand. After Ma won the sewing machine, everything got a little better. Ma was sewing up a storm and getting paid for it, too. Dad got part-time work helping Mr. Kaplan with deliveries. The only thing that wasn't so good was the other prize Ma won. That jar of beans seemed even bigger in Ma's kitchen than it had in Mr. Kaplan's store. To Marshall, it looked like a lifetime supply.